So who really holds the power in the Netherlands? Today, we're going to dive into a pretty complex theory, one that comes from a 40-year investigation. It points to this huge, interconnected network that's supposedly shaping Dutch policy, but from behind the scenes. The claim? That this is Holland's hidden government.
Okay, let's just get right to it. This is the central, explosive claim. This is at the very heart of the material we're looking at. It's a massive accusation, right? It's basically saying the real levers of power aren't where we all think they are. It's a bold, bold statement. So let's break down what this shadow government is even supposed to be.
All right, to really get our heads around this theory, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we're going to define what this shadow government claim even is. Then we'll trace its origins. We'll follow the money, of course, see how its whole influence machine works, and finally, we'll ask the big question. Does this all add up to some kind of unchecked power?
So first things first, what exactly is this so-called shadow government? Now, if you're picturing spies and trench coats and secret meetings, you can forget that. The source describes a structure that's much more integrated, something that's become deeply embedded within the Dutch state itself.
And to explain this, the source uses a really brilliant metaphor, Spekkoek. It's a dense, layered Dutch cake. So think of it like this. Each layer, an activist group, an NGO, a government ministry, they all seem distinct. But according to this theory, they've all been baked together into one inseparable structure. You can't tell where one layer ends and the next one begins. That is the core idea of this hidden network.
Okay, so if this thing exists, how on earth did it get started? Well, according to the investigator, the story doesn't actually begin with domestic politics. No, the roots of this whole Spekkoek structure were apparently planted decades ago in the world of international development aid.
And this timeline here kind of lays out the key moments. The investigation really zeroes in on 1973. That's when a man named Jan Pronk, a major figure from the early NGO world, became the Minister for Development Cooperation. The claim is that he basically turned on the money spigot. He opened the floodgates for government subsidies, which fueled this massive expansion of the NGO sector, and in doing so, created an entire ecosystem totally dependent on state funding.
Right. A machine this big needs a lot of fuel. So let's talk about the money. Where does it all come from? The source points to not one, but two massive parallel streams of funding. And this setup is supposedly what gives this complex both immense resources and, crucially, strategic independence.
And listen, we are not talking about small change here. The numbers are just staggering. The investigation estimates that billions of euros flow into this NGO complex every single year. This funding comes from Dutch taxpayers, European funds, and, as we'll see, another very strategic source.
So this funding strategy is described as a sort of two-pronged attack. On one side, you've got the direct state subsidies from taxpayer money. But on the other side, and this is where it gets really interesting, the investigation alleges something remarkable, that the postcode lottery was deliberately created by NGO insiders to establish a parallel river of cash, a river that they controlled completely with zero government oversight.
Okay, so they've got the money, billions of it. How is this influence actually used? Well, the source breaks down a multi-pronged strategy that moves from setting agendas and lobbying all the way to the courtroom.
So check out how this cycle of influence allegedly works. An NGO gets its state funding. It then uses that money to develop a policy proposal. The source claims the entire Dutch climate law was actually conceived inside an NGO. Then it lobbies politicians to adopt it. And here's the kicker. If the government doesn't play ball, it can use that independent lottery money to sue the very state that's funding it in the first place.
And beyond just lobbying, the investigation points to a powerful legal machine. It alleges that lottery money is used to fund special university chairs in things like asylum law, which creates academic legitimacy for their positions. This then supports a whole network of state-paid lawyers and fuels lobbying in European courts. It's described as a self-reinforcing system of legal influence.
But look, this isn't just about money and law, it's also about people. The source describes a revolving door where you see individuals moving just seamlessly between top jobs at NGOs, in political parties, and in government. Someone like Diederik Samson, for example, goes from heading Greenpeace to leading a major political party. This constant movement, it's argued, completely blurs the lines between who is the activist and who is the state.
So what's the ultimate consequence of this whole interconnected system, according to the investigation? Well, the source argues that it amounts to the creation of a brand new, unofficial branch of government.
And that's really the core argument. that this entire NGO complex has become an unaccountable power center. It's got the money, the access, and the people to shape national policy on huge issues like climate and immigration. And it does all of this without ever having to face a single voter.
And this alleged gap is presented as the key democratic problem. The source claims that while Dutch voters often lean center-right, the national policy consistently moves in a progressive direction. The reason for that gap, it argues, is that policy isn't just reflecting what voters want anymore, it's being driven by this powerful state-funded network that operates outside the normal democratic process.
Ultimately, all of this leaves us with a really fundamental democratic question. I mean, NGOs and activists are a vital part of any open society, right? But according to this theory, you have to ask, when does passionate advocacy, especially when it's backed by billions in public and private money, cross the line and become an unelected power that undermines the whole process?